Upsets, a few comebacks, and a controversial call has shaken up my top 25. Let's get at it. Okay, 25 through 12, I've had a lot of movement just because of, like I said earlier, with the upsets. We'll go ahead and look at my out. Oklahoma State got killed by Kansas State 42 to 20. Man, was I wrong about Oklahoma State. In my first few weeks, I had them in the playoff. I don't even think they have a shot now. And the Big 12 just looks. Who wants to win it? Apparently, Oklahoma State and Utah is not one of them. But anyway, Washington State got destroyed by Boise State 45-24. So they've been knocked out. I had Navy in there. They didn't play this week, and I only pulled them out because of Boise State's win over Washington State. And that's where we'll start at 25, Boise State. Ashton Genty, their running back, he went for another 259 yards with 4 touchdowns. I'll talk about him a little more on my Heisman watch. They deserve to be in that top 25. Moving on to 24, I have James Madison. A few weeks back, they absolutely annihilated North Carolina, putting on 53 points in the first half, I believe. They ended up scoring 70. Yesterday, they slaughtered Ball State 63-7, so that offense is really clicking. Going to 23, I have the Utah Utes, who, they beat Oklahoma State. They look like, hey, we could be the Big 12 team that makes the playoff. I mean, they still have a shot, but they go out and lose to Arizona, and I don't know what the Big 12 is right now. I know Utah needs Cam Rising. I've said that from the beginning. He has a hard time staying healthy. But now Arizona, the team that I said a few weeks back, I really like Arizona. Maybe they'll start coming back into the fold for the Big 12, but we'll have to see. Speaking of the Big 12, number 22, Kansas State. They go out and blow Oklahoma State out 42 to 20 after they got beat by BYU the following week 38 to 9. So it begs the question, is the Big 12 going to send a 3 or even possible 4-loss team into a bye week in the playoff? It could happen. These teams could keep beating up on each other. Neither one of them has found their stride yet. BYU and Iowa State kind of have, but I still think they're very beatable. BYU barely beat Baylor. Now, it can still happen with all the other conferences too, SEC, Big Ten, but right now the Big 12, I seriously think they're going to have a 3-loss team in the playoff. Kind of staying in that same range. Nebraska didn't play this weekend, but I have them at 21. At number 20, you have Oklahoma, who had to come back to beat Auburn 27-21, and that's a big win for them. They didn't want to move to the SEC and then lose their first 2 SEC games, so that was a big win for Oklahoma. At 19, I have Illinois. They lost to Penn State 21-7. That game was close for a long time. It was 7-7 for a long time. Then it was 14-7. And Penn State's defense just shut Illinois down. And then they had that pick right at towards the end of the game where Illinois was driving. I think they were inside the 30-yard line before they threw that interception, and then Penn State went on to score, and that's where it became 21-7. But Illinois was getting ready to tie that game up and make it a lot more interesting. So the score is kind of somewhat deceiving, but that Penn State defense is for real. I'll talk about them later. At 18, you have USC, who was another team like Oklahoma. USC was down 21-10 at halftime against Wisconsin. Another team that's moved into another big conference, the Big Ten. I'm sure they didn't want to get beat by Michigan one week and Wisconsin this week, but they came back. Miller Moss had a big game, and they beat Wisconsin 38-21. At 17, you have Clemson, who has really turned the page since the loss to Georgia in the first game of the season. They beat Stanford 40-14. The quarterback Klubnik is looking much better. That defense that was advertised is playing really well. I mean, they played really well against Georgia until that second half, and I think they just kind of ran out of steam because their offense couldn't move the ball to give them a break. But watch out for Clemson. Miami showed us that maybe they're not quite there yet, but Miami better watch out for Clemson and Louisville for that matter. And that's number 16, Louisville, who got beat by Notre Dame 24-31. They were close for a little bit, and then Notre Dame went out by 2 touchdowns, and then they just couldn't catch up to them. They scored with about 4 or 5 minutes left and was trying to hold Notre Dame so that they would have a shot at tying it up, but never got the chance. But I still think Louisville is a pretty solid ACC team. I still think Clemson's better, and I think Clemson has the biggest shot at taking Miami out. At 15, I have the defending champions, the Michigan Wolverines. They beat Minnesota 27-24. They had a solid lead, but they just couldn't put them away. Michigan's gonna have to find a passing game. They're gonna keep winning games like this. That defense is still good, but that running game is so solid. They can keep running the ball, but to make a dent into the Big Ten and even have a shot at possibly beating Ohio State or even Penn State, they're gonna have to find a passing game. I'm not sure Orgy is the key there. It just doesn't seem like he can hit the passes that he needs. But they've got to start developing. The OC needs to come in and develop and give them opportunities to throw the ball. But AP has them at 10, and I just can't put them that high. Let's move up to 14. We have the LSU Tigers. They beat South Alabama 42-10. Not much to talk there. As I always say, I can't trust Brian Kelly. We'll have to see how they continue to move on. At 13, I have one of my first teams to fall out of the top 10 that has been highly ranked for me, and that's Ole Miss. They lost to Kentucky 13-20. Maybe that Kentucky game against Georgia wasn't a fluke because they pretty much played Ole Miss the same way. You know, Jackson Dart had been lighting up those cupcake teams, but when he actually came to play a good defense, he just didn't look good, and this is what Ole Miss did last year. You know, a lot of people talk about Lane Kiffin like he's some huge offensive guru, but has he ever won at any school he's ever been at? Everybody talks so highly of him. He's starting to fall into my Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley group where he just can't win big games or even some of the mediocre games. But Jackson Dart, they really needed him yesterday and he couldn't come through. The transfer from Georgia, Vandergriff, proved to play better for Kentucky than he did. Moving on to number 12, we have BYU. BYU is one of my biggest movers this week. I had them in the 20s last week, and now I have them at number 12. They beat Baylor 34-28, and I like to move the teams that are undefeated up into the rankings because I believe if you have a bad beat, you can move down 8. Why can't you move up 8 as well? And I have them big movers this week. So there it is, 25 through 12 for me going into week 6. Let's start with our top 11. And at number 11, we have the Iowa State Cyclones, who beat Houston 20-0. They are my leaders for the Big 12, who I said earlier. A lot of teams, one team looks good, and then they get beat really badly. And then that team that beat another good team fairly badly gets beat by somebody else pretty badly. So they just keep beating each other up a little bit. Iowa State hasn't played anybody except for Iowa, and they beat them by 1 point. They've been relying heavily on that defense, but I think they're going to have to find a little more offense to have a true shot of winning the Big 12. At this point, I really have no idea who's going to win the Big 12. Is it going to be BYU? I don't know. Their offense isn't that great either. I don't know. I seriously don't know. It could be anyone. And I fully believe that the team that wins the Big 12 will have 3 losses minimum because there's just not a dominant team that can take over the conference at this point. I was high on Oklahoma State. I thought they had the best running back in the nation, and I thought they could rely on him. They have a veteran quarterback. I thought their offense was going to be better, and if they could find any defense, they were going to have a very good shot at winning the Big 12. They're actually the third worst rushing team in the Big 12. They only have 511 yards rushing. Opponents are just loading the box, going, okay, we're not going to let Ollie beat us. Let's see if Bowman can. We'll just let him throw if he can beat us. And that's the thing. He really hasn't been able to do enough outside of when they're loading that box to stop the run. So, I don't know. Like I said, the Big 12 is the most wide open conference because it could literally go week by week on who's going to have a shot at winning that conference. And to finish up Iowa State, I had them ranked 20th last week, AP 16. I moved them up because they're undefeated and they have a good defense. And their player of the game was Abu Sama III. He was a running back, had 101 yards rushing with 1 TD. Their other running back had 96 yards as well. The only thing that stinks is both of them had 2 really long runs that really helped them get up to that yardage. But anyway, their next 3 games, they still play a decent Baylor team, a decent West Virginia team, and a good, solid Central Florida team. None of those are ranked. Still a solid competition as they move through some of their conference games. Moving up into the ranked in position is Notre Dame. They were previously 16th. They're 14th in the AP. They defeated Louisville 31-24. It was a fun game to watch. I got to watch a little bit of it. Their player of the game was Jordan Clark. Their safety had 5 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and 1 pass defended. Their next 3 games, they get a bye week coming up, but they'll play Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Navy. They shouldn't have any problems with Stanford, but Georgia Tech and Navy could give them a pretty good game. I'm really curious to see how well Georgia Tech plays against them, especially how well Northern Illinois did a few weeks back. I moved them up because they're one of the few teams that has 2 top 25 wins, and that's why I moved them up into my top 10. So I rank these by week-to-week performance. It still doesn't mean if I believe in a team or not to a certain degree, because I do not believe in this Notre Dame team. I don't think that they're going to make the playoff, and if they do, it's because of how their schedule is. But I think a lot of these ACC teams might beat them and knock them out of the playoff. But you have to go week by week, and right now I have them at number 10. At number 9, I have my Georgia Bulldogs. So I got to confess something. When your team is getting beat up like they did in the first quarter, man, it is very difficult for me. As huge of a fan I am, I'm so passionate about football. I'm also very passionate about baseball. My Braves were playing a big game in the second quarter. After you're down 21-0, I was switching back and forth. And then after the Braves won their game late in the second quarter, I flipped back over and stayed and watched it throughout. And I'm glad I did, especially the way we came back and really fought hard in that game. Carson Beck still worries me a little bit. He gets those jitters in the first half. It's really more about our OC, Mike Bobo. He drives me crazy. It's like he gets in such a run pass, and he does so many screen plays. They did open it up early, and I think that drop pass by Smith in the first series was huge. Carson dropped it right in his bread basket, and he dropped it. That we could at least got a field goal and made it 7-3, and maybe kept that momentum down, but he dropped the ball. So we lost to Alabama 34-41. They just have our number, no matter if it's Saban or not. Right now, I was thinking, but DeBoer is a good coach, and we know that. I'm not going to take anything away from DeBoer and how he had that team prepared to play against Georgia. The player of the game for Georgia was Dan Jackson. He's a defensive back. He had 10 tackles, and then he had like a half of a tackle for loss, if I can get that out. Their next three games, they have Auburn, Mississippi State, and then they go to Austin and they'll play the ranked 2 Longhorns, which kind of gives away some of my future top 10, but that's all good. But hopefully, Georgia will have a chance to bounce back. Hopefully, they don't take Auburn too lightly or Mississippi State, any SEC team. But I hope we go into Texas with only that Alabama loss. Moving up 3 spots for me is Missouri. A lot of that has to do with some of the losses. But they were 11th last week. They're AP 9. They had a bye week, so there's not much to talk about. Their upcoming games, they'll play Texas A&M, who's currently ranked. They're not in mine. And then they'll go to UMass, and then they'll have Auburn. So they have a top 25 matchup in the next 3 weeks, and we'll see if they can. You could almost call them the cardiac cats. They've had 2 very close games in the previous 2 weeks. They barely beat Vanderbilt by 3 points. Then they beat Boston College by 6. So hopefully they can catch or play a little better and not have so many close games. But watch out for Texas A&M. They could come in, or Missouri could go out there, especially with that 12th man, and have problems with the Aggies. But with it being a bye week, I just don't have any more on them right now. Falling down to number 7, I have the Miami Hurricanes. They were 5th for me last week. They're currently 8th in the AP. They defeated Virginia Tech 38-34 on Friday night. I was actually watching almost about 2.5 quarters, the whole second half of that game. And there was a controversial call. I said it at the beginning. I'll be honest with you, the referee was so far away from the play, I'm not sure if he could see him actually holding on to it, but he actually did. It was pretty interesting call. I actually thought it was a touchdown for Virginia Tech. I think Miami got lucky that they overturned it. I didn't think there was enough information to overturn it. He came down and established the ball and made, I guess you can't make a football move when you're coming down on your backside, and then the guy popped it out. I thought it was a touchdown. I actually think Miami got lucky. Their player of the game is Malik Bryant. He's our linebacker. He had 4 tackles with a half sack and 1.5 tackles for loss. Their next 3 games, they have to travel all the way out to Cal. Still can't believe they're doing all this junk with the East Coast, West Coast combining. I want to keep saying it, they need to make super conferences and make them make sense regionally and bring some of these schools back together where they're not having to fly literally across the country to play each other. Then after Cal, they'll go up to Louisville, play the 16th ranked Cardinals, and then they'll have Florida State. The Hurricanes have the second top offense in the nation right now. Their defense is playing well, but after Louisville, at this week, they have no other top 25 games. Because after that, like I said here, they have Florida State. Then they have Duke, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, and Syracuse. Maybe Georgia Tech could move in the top 25. Maybe Duke's undefeated. One of those 2 teams could break the top 25, but it's not like they're going to play a top 10 team. So Clemson would have to win out to play Miami. I think Miami has the easiest path to a conference championship game, but I still think Clemson could give them a hell of a game, and it will be between one of those to go to the playoff. And I have Cam Ward on my Heisman watch. I'll talk about him a little more later on. But Miami, they got an easy path. They should be able, even if they lose one of those games, they could still go in and win the conference championship to get into the playoff. Or they could even, if they run the table and then just lose to Clemson in the conference championship, I still think they'll make the playoff because it'd be a top 10 team barely falling out. Just depends on who's kind of falling in that 11th through 15th area. Another team that is moving up the list is number 6, the Oregon Ducks. I had them previously at 8. They are AP 6. They defeated UCLA 34-13. Their player of the game was Tez Johnson, the wide receiver. He had 11 receptions with 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. Their next 3 games are Michigan State, and then they have the big one against number 3 Ohio State, and then they go to Purdue. Oregon has been tested a little bit. They played Boise State. They only beat them 37-34. You know, they struggled in that first game against Idaho. After Boise State, they've really started picking up some steam. And then they'll have Michigan State this weekend, which Ohio State had no problems with yesterday. And then they will host Ohio State. I cannot wait for that game. You know, Oregon went and beat Ohio State a few years back for a big upset. And this is their chance, a chance to really take over that Big Ten and have a shot of getting that bye. And even if they lose Ohio State, I think they could lose 2 more games and still get into the playoff. They are a talented team, and this is a team you want in the playoff because they would provide a really good matchup to some of the other teams. And what's interesting about them, they could go in the playoff and play Penn State, and they don't play Penn State in the regular season. And that would be interesting, even though I don't think Penn State's going to make it because they find a way to lose to Michigan and Ohio State every year and maybe one other team. But with that defense, we'll see. But right now, that's where I have Oregon at number 6. Moving up to number 5, I have Penn State. They were at number 9. Their current AP is 7. They defeated Illinois, the 12th ranked team for me, 21-7. I mentioned it a little earlier. The game was a little closer than that. They scored late, and Illinois was trying to drive to tie the game up towards the end of the game. Their player of the game was Abdul Carter, defensive end. He had 7 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for losses, and 1 pass defended. In the next 3 weeks, they have UCLA. They'll go out to USC, and then they'll get a bye week, and they'll go out to play Wisconsin. So this defense is, every year their defense looks very good, and then they provide just enough offense to win football games. I've been picking on Aller all the time. I actually gave them their player of the game last week. I don't think Penn State's a top 5 team. They are right now, but I don't think they're going to end the season in the top 5. I still think Oregon and Ohio State is the cream of the crop for the Big Ten this year. So, yeah, Penn State is, they're 5. At number 4, I have the Tennessee Volunteers. They move up due to some of the upsets, even though they didn't even play. I had them 7 last week. They're AP 4. Man, I got to start getting my top 10 out before the AP. That's so difficult, though. But people don't think I just go look at the rankings and just pick, go through it and move it around a little bit. No, I do a lot of research and I love football and I watch a lot of games and I try to base it on my opinion on who is doing well. Even though I thought I was doing something that I didn't think the AP would do with number 1, but they did it anyway. Volunteers had a bye week this week. They go to Arkansas. Then they have Florida, which is not the Florida we know. And then in 3 weeks, they will host Alabama, the number 1 team in the nation, which will give away my number 1 team. But anyway, they have the hard time as us, Georgia, beating Alabama. But they will play that big game in 3 weeks. Moving on to my third-ranked team, that's the Ohio State Buckeyes. They were number 2 last week. I have a team moving up due to them beating another top 5 team. AP rank is 3. They defeated Michigan State 38-7. Their player of the game was Sonny Styles. He's a safety. He had 6 tackles and a sack. Their next 3 games is Iowa, and then they go out to Oregon, play number 6, and then they'll get a bye week, and then they'll play ranked 21 Nebraska. Is this the best team in the country? Man, I actually think they might be. We're going to find out in 2 weeks. This team plays good offense, great defense. Actually, their offense is looking great too. I think this team's chance of winning a national championship is completely on Will Howard's shoulders. They have the best running back duo in the nation. They have a great wide receiving core. Their defense plays well. They have Chip Kelly, who I think is a great offensive coordinator, like I've said all year long. Watch out. This is one of the teams to beat for sure, if not the team to beat. Falling to number 2 is the Texas Longhorns. They've been my number 1 team for 2 weeks after they beat Michigan. They're AP 2, so they dropped in the AP as well. They defeated Mississippi State 35-13, but man, they had some problems with them. And other teams have not had any problems with Mississippi State. Even Florida put it on them pretty good. Their player of the game is Colin Simmons, the linebacker, 7 tackles with 2 sacks and 3 tackles for loss. Their next 3 games, they got some doozies. They play ranked 20th Oklahoma, in 2 weeks, and then they'll have Georgia, and then they'll go out to Vandy. All 3 of those teams are good opponents and should test them throughout this time. Are they saving Ewers to come back to play Oklahoma? Probably so. They even may let Manning play Oklahoma and then put Ewers back in against Georgia. I'm not sure. I mean, I could easily see Texas and Ohio State in the national championship this year. That's how good I think they truly are. Moving to the number 1 team in the nation, it is the Alabama Crimson Tide. They moved from 3-1 after beating Georgia 41-34, having that huge lead in the first half. They were up 28-0. Their player of the game, we all know about the young kid Ryan Williams, the wide receiver. He had 6 catches for 177 yards and a touchdown. Their next 3 games is at Vandy, then they have South Carolina, then they go to Tennessee. So, just like all the other teams, very formidable opponents that could upset anyone at any given time. This team, they keep finding ways to win. No Saban, who cares? I think they picked the better coach. I know they're trying to go after Dan Lanning at Oregon, but I think DeBoer just fits this team. The way he runs the team similar to Saban, and look, Saban still got an office there. You know he had to be in there, giving them game plans, helping them out, giving them guidance, because he is there in his office, I'm sure, until he has to go wherever game day is going, and that influence is still huge. Don't take anything away from DeBoer, though. I think he's a good coach. He didn't take Washington to the national championship for nothing. But I still think that this team is beatable. I still believe that Texas and Ohio State is better than this team. It's just they beat a top 10 team. Even though Georgia came back in that last 2 minutes, had the lead for, I think they said 13 seconds before Milroe made that bomb to the Ryan Williams, which was impressive. Hey, he got smacked in the mouth, and they turned around and smacked Georgia right back. Then Georgia was driving at the end, and another freshman player made a huge interception. They had went to the well one too many times like Bobo likes to do, but that kid was smart enough, and they put him in position, and he got the interception to seal the win for Alabama. You just want to say Alabama like Forrest Gump does all the time. Alabama. Anyway, they deserve it. They are the number one team in the country right now. Just like there's so many good games coming up. That game in 3 weeks with them going out to Tennessee, that will be another test for them. And even Vandy this week could be a solid test coming off such a high win against Georgia. And we'll see how they handle that. So props to Alabama. They came in, played very well, and they are the deserving number one team right now. It's bracket time, so let's take a look at what it looks like going into week 6. At the number one position the number one seed is Alabama. At number 8, we have Oregon playing number 9, Missouri. At number 12, we have James Madison as the mid-major. They would play number 5, Texas. And at the bottom, BYU would be the Big 12 winner. At the top right-hand corner, the 3rd seed would be Miami, the ACC champ. They wouldn't play. Notre Dame would be an 11th seed, and they would play Tennessee as the 6th seed. Georgia has fallen to the 10th seed, and they would play Penn State at the 7th seed. And then you would have Ohio State as your Big Ten champion right now, as that bye in the number 2 seed. So there it is. That's the bracket heading into week 6. Let's take a look at my Heisman watch. I'll start at the ones that are not in my top 3, the ones that wouldn't make it to New York. I forgot to add Will Johnson last week, the cornerback from Michigan, and I had put it in my notes, and then I'd made some changes, and I didn't add him back. But I have him at number 4. I mean, 2 of his plays is the reason why Michigan's where they're at currently. You know how much I like Miller Moss. He's at 5. Nick Nash, who was my number 3, the wide receiver for San Jose State, fell back to 6. And then I still have the offensive lineman Kelvin Banks Jr. at 7. But moving back in the top 3 would be Ashton Genty. He's the running back for Boise State. He had 259 yards and 4 touchdowns. This kid, he rushed. Do you know, it's difficult to get 100 yards. And he's had 200 multiple times already. So impressive. And how does Florida let a running back get out of Jacksonville? Man, good pickup for Boise State. And that's another reason they're one of my top 25 teams. Still, my number 2 for my Heisman watch would be Cam Ward, the quarterback for Miami. He had 343 yards passing with 4 TDs. He did have 2 picks, but he had 57 yards rushing and a rushing TD against Virginia Tech. But that play towards the end, so he's getting rushed. He gets hit by one defensive player, shakes it off. One's coming up, grabs him, and while he's grabbing him, he flicks it off to someone. Incredible play. And then they get 20 to 30 yards that ended up leading to the game-winning drive touchdown. He is incredible. I know I said earlier they got lucky with the call. Even if they lose that game, I'm not changing where he's at. He remains the second best player in the nation. And I would still, even if they lose, even if they don't make it to the national championship, I think he's playing so well that he deserves a trip to New York. And going into week 6, my Heisman pick is still Travis Hunter. And it seems like people are starting to come on board. I only have maybe 100 views a week, not even that sometimes. So it feels good that someone is actually noticing this kid. He actually did the Heisman pose this week. He is definitely deserving of this award. He had 89 yards receiving with 9 catches and a touchdown. He also had 2 tackles, and he also had an interception. He's phenomenal and definitely worthy of being a Heisman winner. So I hope he continues to play well, doesn't get hurt, and has a shot to win that trophy. As always, thank you for listening to Spider Red. I always enjoy doing this, even though it takes a lot of time to do all the editing and getting all the graphics done. I absolutely love this. Hit the subscribe, hit the like, even though I don't like to preach that every week. But again, thank you for listening. Later.